Let's live with my parents from today. They're my parents, so there shouldn't be any problem, right? It was an unexpected proposal from my husband without any prior hint. I was stunned in front of him, almost on the verge of tears, by the words I had never imagined. Isn't this too sudden? My father's funeral just ended. This event happened just a few days after saying goodbye to my father, who passed away after a long battle with illness. Even though the hectic atmosphere of the funeral was still lingering, ignoring my feelings of sorrow, my husband packed up and left our home. The destination was a villa my father had left for me. Surprisingly, my in-laws had already arrived and were staying in the villa. My name is Natalie. I'm 33 years old. I work as a designer and have recently become independent. It's been 3 years since I started living with Justin after our marriage. My career is going well, and I believe I'm a well-known designer. I have a decent income, so the apartment is in my name. During my college years, my mother passed away. My father was diagnosed with malignant tumors, cancer, last year. He was undergoing treatment and battling the disease, but it reached its final stages. Even the doctor we trusted told us to be prepared mentally. When my mother passed away, I had already moved out and was living alone. But ever since I started working at a design company, my father always cared for me and kept in touch frequently. He was very important to me. When I was informed about my father's illness, I was deeply shocked. Watching his condition worsen day by day, I spent sleepless nights filled with worry and anxiety. What have you heard from the doctor about your father's illness? Is it not getting any better? Should I, as a son-in-law, go and visit him? My husband frequently inquired about my father's condition. However, I didn't feel like he was genuinely concerned. It felt as if he was waiting for my father's passing. In the past, my husband had always shown a sense of inferiority because he earned less than me. I hoped he would take pride in my achievements and support me during tough times. However, he had a childish side, was very competitive, and seemed to only enjoy situations where he had the upper hand. My father said not to worry about him and to prioritize our time as a couple. But I was thinking it might be better to visit him while we can. That way, there won't be any regrets later on. I found it harder and harder to suppress my growing disdain for my husband. During our early married days, I felt deep love from him, and our time together was joyful. However, his insensitive remarks about my father's illness were too much to bear. By the time I realized, the kind and loving husband I knew had transformed. And I struggled to accept this change. My husband works from home. I plan to work from home after becoming independent. But he said, having someone around distracts me. So, I rented a small office and started commuting. While the hospital was easily accessible for me, my husband worked from home all day, leaving all the household chores to me, balancing work, attending to my father, and returning home exhausted. I found the mess my husband made and dishes he'd used left untouched. He lived selfishly, disregarding my feelings. Living with him made me realize his lack of understanding, and I felt profound loneliness. Then, my father passed away. We had already sold our family home after discussing it with my father. Until heading to the funeral hall, I was busy with funeral preparations. However, my husband was preoccupied with calling someone or disappearing. He seemed uninterested in helping me. Justin, please help me, especially during such a tough time. I tried to express my feelings, but at that moment, my husband's phone rang. After he ended the call, he laughed and said, "I've been getting a lot of work calls." Inside, my anger and disappointment towards my husband grew stronger. Perhaps the premature loss of my father only intensified these feelings. His words had become colder than before, and I felt deep sadness. On the day of the funeral, my husband spent a long time talking somewhere with his parents. When they returned, they were all smirking. And the suspicious glances from other attendees made me feel even more isolated. Nevertheless, the cremation, interment, and inheritance procedures went smoothly. And the funeral was successfully concluded. Afterwards, my husband suddenly suggested, "Let's live with my parents from today." They're my parents, so it shouldn't be a problem, right? They're my parents, so it's not an issue, right? If you're against it, should we get divorced? Saying it lightly with a laugh, I couldn't stay calm after hearing his unreasonable statement. Fueled by the grief of losing my father, I strongly countered. Live together where? We don't have any spare rooms in this apartment, do we? In reality, one room in our apartment was used as a workspace and to store my husband's work materials. Given that we didn't have children, my husband used the room lavishly. "It's that villa you inherited," he responded with a smile. I was stunned. While the family home was sold, the villa was a special place cherished by my father and me. It was filled with memories of my father, and I intended to keep it that way. However, my husband seemed to care little about my feelings and continued to make selfish demands. "I hope you understand that living in that villa would be difficult." However, my husband didn't seem to listen. His parents had already terminated their apartment lease and decided to move to the villa. They probably arranged the move during my father's funeral. Given the villa's spaciousness and tranquil location, they probably found it an attractive place to live. Their move had already begun, and there was no room for objections. Whenever I voiced my opinion, my husband clearly showed his displeasure. "You always think about yourself. You've been absent from home so much because of your father's illness and sudden calls. Do you realize how much I've tolerated because of your obsession with your father?" His real feelings were cruel, and I felt my world darkening. "Now that your father has passed away, you should listen to me. He took a whole year to die, which was way too long." His cold words kept coming. While I was filled with disbelief, I didn't want to believe that this was the true nature of my husband. Yet, it was clear he had little regard for my father and me. I remembered my father's pained expressions as he lay on the narrow hospital bed. My father wouldn't have wanted to leave his only daughter behind. And he surely wouldn't have wanted me to just obey my husband. At that moment, I clearly felt that all my affection for my husband had vanished. My heart tightened thinking about how my husband felt joy over getting the villa during the time I should have been mourning my father's death. Still, I held back my emotions and continued to caution my husband. "You can try living in the villa, but don't regret it later." I doubt that will happen. In that case, I had to accept his determination. I packed a minimum amount of belongings and left our home. Seeing my few possessions, my husband looked puzzled. But all I said was, "I'll come back for what I need later." Honestly, I didn't even want to exchange another word with him. It was excruciating to see the faces of my in-laws, who, I imagined, had probably been eagerly awaiting my father's death and were now gleefully moving in. But I silently followed my husband. The only thing I couldn't accept was my beloved place being taken over by his whims. Though technically a villa, it's a single-family home located by the sea. It's in a neighborhood where people lead ordinary lives. However, it's conveniently accessible from the city center, and the land is indeed valuable. Exiting the station, the familiar scenery from my childhood spread out before me. Back then, my mother was still alive, and after I fell asleep from exhaustion during a train ride, my father would carry me on his back all the way home. When we arrived at the villa, my in-laws were already inside. Suspicion arose, but it seemed my husband had secretly taken the key and, without my knowledge, had given a duplicate to my in-laws. This realization made me even more uneasy. The idea that they had secretly and stealthily planned to move into the villa without anyone knowing intensified my distrust. Glancing around the villa, my in-laws' eyes shone with anticipation of their future life here. Although it's a single-family home, the sturdy furniture that my father had carefully chosen was arranged throughout. The slightly different, European-style furnishings were probably to my mother's taste. What a lovely villa. Isn't it just perfect? Goodbye to living in that cramped apartment. It's such a blessing that we get to live here from now on. The view from the second floor is amazing. Your father was sly for keeping such a marvelous house a secret. We should all share it. After all, we're family. Their ecstatic comments further irritated me. It seemed as though they greatly underestimated the significance of my father's passing and simply thought of the villa as a luxurious, beautiful house they were lucky to have. Really, both the location and the house are impeccable. I'm grateful he left us this magnificent villa. We must thank your father. With no sense of delicacy, my husband, joining in with his inconsiderate parents, said this while laughing. Then, the three of them opened beers to toast the move. I sighed deeply as I prepared some snacks. I watched my husband and in-laws, feeling the precious memories I had shared with my parents at the dining table being tainted. I decided to hide my feelings and endure the night. The next morning, my mother-in-law's shrill scream echoed through the quiet villa, instantly changing the atmosphere. I immediately realized what might have happened. Waking up, I noticed my father-in-law and husband causing a commotion, and I was a bit delayed in approaching the source of the scream. In the bathroom, my mother-in-law was on the floor, clutching her foot, with a panicked expression. The floor just gave way beneath me. She was still shaken and out of breath from the sudden incident. The floor looks fine. You probably just slipped, right? While neither my husband nor my father-in-law seemed to grasp the situation. It was right here. They checked the spot she pointed out. Yet, the floorboards were smooth and perfectly aligned. Still, she insisted, I'm sure the floor collapsed. As they examined the floor, I addressed them. Have you tried stepping on that slightly differently colored part of the floor? All three of them looked surprised and immediately fixed their gaze on that spot. I stepped in between them, leaned forward, and with my slippered foot, pressed on the differently colored section. Whoa! What was that? As I stepped on it, the floorboard made a clear sound and slightly sunk. But the moment I lifted my foot, it snapped back into place. If someone stepped on it unknowingly, they'd surely think the floor had collapsed. See, the floor sinks a bit. It's kind of like a trapdoor. What? That's dangerous. Is this house defective? I calmly explained, and they all looked at me in surprise and skepticism. It's not a defect. My father intentionally installed it in this house. What? Why would he do that? It's what you'd call a mechanical mansion or a trick house. Actually, my father was a huge ninja enthusiast. This villa, into which he poured a lot of time and money, was his pride and joy and a treasure to him. As a child, I often visited here while he adjusted the house's mechanisms or added new ones. That's why there are traps and mechanisms throughout the villa. A shelf you shouldn't touch, a floorboard that drops when stepped on, a door that only opens following a specific sequence, hidden doors, and even secret rooms. This villa is filled with the dreams and cleverness of my father, honed over many years. Of course, it isn't a place suited for daily life. While I, having visited since childhood and taught by my father how to operate all the traps, have no issues, it's a different story for my husband and in-laws who are unfamiliar. I did warn you that living in this villa would be difficult. I also told you it's a place filled with my father's memories. My father's extreme ninja obsession is famous among our relatives. The real surprise is that you didn't know. At first, my husband claimed he hadn't heard, but now he was at a loss for words. My in-laws were equally shocked by this newfound information. Having already canceled our apartment lease and now having nowhere to return to, they were pressing my husband on what to do next. In the midst of this, both my father-in-law and husband accidentally triggered another trap, causing them to fall. Seeing the two of them lying on the ground, I couldn't help but chuckle. Please, feel free to stay as long as you like. My tone was more mocking than genuine. They had been entranced by the luxury of the villa, disregarding my warnings and showing no interest in my father's hobbies. Now, all their oversight was coming back to bite them. Even explaining the dangers of the traps fell on deaf ears. "This isn't a big deal. We'll get used to it," I responded with a confident smile, acknowledging his comment. "I'll head back to the apartment to prepare for our move." I left them in the villa. However, in reality, I had no moving preparations. I planned to take a few days off and spend time sorting through my father's belongings. As expected, after just 2 days, my husband and in-laws had reached their limit. In that short time, I found solace being by myself. And I could slowly regain a positive outlook, planning my new life. Before long, my father's villa became a minor tourist attraction in the neighborhood. It was regularly featured in local newsletters as the trick mansion hidden in a residential area, and during times when the villa was occupied, people intrigued by the trick mansion would visit. Upon reflection, I recalled strangers touring the villa and local children playing, making it a lively spot. My father had listed both the villas and our home's phone numbers in the newsletters. However, since the sold family home's number was now inactive, any inquiries would come to the villa's number. Due to my upbringing, I was proficient enough in foreign languages to manage calls from foreign visitors. But my husband and in-laws couldn't understand foreign languages at all. On top of the nerve-wracking lifestyle of constantly worrying about the traps, they were overwhelmed by unexpected visitors and handling calls in foreign languages. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, they stumbled back to the apartment. Why don't we all live in this apartment together? Think about it. They had longed for my father's early demise to get their hands on the villa, only to give it up in just 2 days. Instead of serving them tea, I handed my husband the divorce papers, which were already filled out and stamped in my section. "There's no way we can live together. If you understand, just leave quickly," I explained with a deep sigh. First and foremost, I couldn't forgive him for disregarding my feelings and acting insensitively. Without consulting me or giving any explanation, my husband decided we'd live with his parents. Moreover, he had never shared household responsibilities with me before. He dumped all household responsibilities onto me. I felt cornered, but he seemed indifferent about it. He ignored my feelings, acted selfishly, and secretly decided to move in with his parents. I couldn't imagine continuing to live with someone like that. What happened? "You used to love me, right?" I couldn't help but laugh at his usual oblivious remarks. "You think I could love someone who wished for my beloved father's early death and would rejoice when he passed?" I handed him only the divorce papers and drove the 3 of them out of the apartment. "First of all, this is my apartment. If you have a problem, you should be the one to leave." My husband raised his voice without any consideration for the neighbors, but I responded calmly. "Natalie, I'll call the police for trespassing. If you don't want that, leave quietly. Do you not remember this apartment is under my name?" They suddenly fell silent upon hearing my words. They relied on me financially and didn't have much of their own. However, I had made up my mind to cut ties before their lengthy persuasions began. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had much in savings. After being evicted from the apartment and being unable to return to the villa, they now live in a cheap, low-quality apartment and are barely getting by. The previous apartment was better. They often repeated this sentiment. At first, my husband felt guilty and apologized frequently. But over time, he grew increasingly resentful of his parents. Due to their age, they rarely worked, and when they did, it didn't last long. In the end, they exhausted their savings and pension with every move, constantly argued, and became estranged as a family. The walls of the apartment were thin, letting out their daily quarrels. Even when they received noise complaints, they didn't apologize. Instead, they retaliated, causing them to be disliked by their neighbors. They might need to find a new place to live soon. My husband previously enjoyed working from home, but in the current apartment, he didn't have the luxury of a dedicated workspace. Unable to concentrate on his job, his reputation and sales plummeted. Now, he barely gets by with a late-night convenience store job, and should consider juggling multiple part-time jobs. The in-laws felt their biggest mistake was letting their son control their decisions. In their frequent arguments, they blamed the villa's traps. If you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this situation. You should have checked properly. Don't blame me now. She's the one who kept important things secret. Shut up. If you had communicated properly with your father, this wouldn't have happened. I never imagined we'd end up like this because of our son. Yet, they had always wished to inherit the villa and were overjoyed when my father passed away. I will never forget that. After the divorce, I made significant strides in my career as a designer. To process my father's death and all these events, I created designs incorporating ninja elements and showcased them on social media. Their popularity spread rapidly, and one day, a major cosmetics company contacted me. To my astonishment, they wanted me to design packaging with an Asian touch incorporating ninja elements. I feel this work will preserve my father's cherished memories. I reflected. Of course, I eagerly took on this project and committed fully to it. Ultimately, it was a huge success. This opportunity propelled my career forward, allowing me to give joyful updates at my parents' graves. I've retained the mechanical house, keeping it as a special place filled with memories of my father. I began organizing tour schedules and, with a little tweaking, turned it into a space where both tourists and local children could enjoy for free. Soon, the house attracted significant media attention. The income from this media exposure was a godsend, helping to defray ongoing costs. Furthermore, online articles about the house were translated into foreign languages, leading to support from international fans. Some of the donations even came from elderly folks who shared my father's passion for ninjas. I'm dedicated to the ongoing upkeep of this magical place. Meanwhile, the mechanical house remains a daily hub of activity, a favorite among local children. Is this the legendary mechanical house I've heard about? Where are the tricks? Show us. With the assistance of local volunteers, precautions are taken to ensure the children play safely. Foreign tourists are often awestruck, especially by features like the hidden floorboard doors. Wow. This is amazing. I am so moved to experience such a unique place. What other tricks are here? Although I lost my father and the inheritance of the villa resulted in my divorce, I feel the gains have been greater than the losses. The villa has transformed into a memory-rich location shared with family and friends. I've also undergone a personal transformation, moving forward with renewed optimism and hope.